Hi everyone, and welcome back to Be Ready to Apologize. Today we're going to do lesson 5 in our 6-part series on atheism. Today we're going to cover the lesson, the rationale behind atheism, humanism, and secularism. As I said in our last series, that atheism, humanism, and secularism, essentially they are all related in that in their purest form, they all share a lot in common. For instance, both atheists and humanists say that there is no God. They will say that there is no such thing as the supernatural realm, and that they will say that the material realm is all that there is, basically saying that they only believe in those things that they can experience materially with their five senses. Secularists are slightly different than humanists and atheists in that they will allow for the existence of God. So they will not outright say that God does not exist. So many secularists are essentially agnostics in that they will say that, well, we don't know either way whether God exists or not. Or there might be secularists that will say that, well, hey, I believe that that God exists, but as long as he stays out of the affairs of state, meaning which goes back to the whole argument of the separation of church and state. So as long as God leaves me alone, so to speak, I'm okay with God existing. I'm not going to deny somebody their right to religious expression. A secularist isn't going to mock you for being a Christian. A secularist isn't going to mock your idea that you believe that God exists. However, a secularist in its purest form is very much similar to a secular humanist in that they believe that man is the supreme being in the universe. So, that ultimately, that's where secularism goes. There's a kind of like a spectrum. You have some secularists, yes, that they, they will go to church. They are semi-religious. You have some that are very materialistic. They'll say, yes, God exists, but but as long as God stays in his place, and leaves us alone, to govern ourselves and to decide our own fate, then they're okay with that. And then there are others who are secular, humanists, in that, that they will say that, well, they allow maybe for the existence of God, but ultimately they believe that man is the ultimate being in the universe, and therefore kind of like say, well, God has had his time and it's now time for us to move on. So all three of these philosophies, because they are philosophies and they are religious beliefs, because it is a belief that whatever you believe becomes your religion. So even philosophy is a religious belief. It's an expression of your own value systems, be that atheism, be that humanism, or be that secularism. Even communism, when in Russia, when Stalin imposed communism and basically said that that everybody had to believe in evolution and that Christianity was outlawed. Well, communism became the religion that Russia was forced to live under for 70 years. The same thing in China, when Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, as he was called, also imposed communism upon China and forced the Chinese, also all of the people under him, essentially to worship him, because in communism, the state is God, and therefore whoever is the head of state essentially becomes the God over the people, and whatever the leader says, that is ultimately what the people have to follow. So ultimately, so no matter what you believe, no one can say, oh, well, I don't have any religious beliefs. Yes, you do. You may not call the person or the philosophy that you hold to as God, but it is. So we as Christians, we know the first commandment says, "I am the Lord thy God, and you shall have no other God before me." And therefore anything that you place above God becomes your God. So that is not, so when atheists say, "Oh, it's not, atheism is not a religion, it's not a," it is. It is a belief in the non-existence of God, just like Christianity is a belief system, and that we believe in the existence of God. So we're on two parallel tracks, but we both are driven by a belief. A fair question to ask, as I said, those who hold to this philosophy is how did the universe, the earth, and all life on earth that culminates with the appearance of mankind on the earth, how did all of that come about? Secularists, humanists, and atheists will say that, well, the theory of evolution, explains, answers that question. But there's a big problem with that, because up until today, for the past 150 plus years, that the theory of evolution has essentially replaced creation in society. Evolution is yet to answer the question, where did we come from? How did we get here? Why are we here? What is our purpose? Why do we exist? Why are we here? And where do we go when we die? Now, an atheist will say, "Oh, when we die, we just die and this cease to exist." But we've seen in previous studies that is not true, because we are more than just a material being. We have thoughts. Where do thoughts come from? Thoughts are certainly not material in nature. We have emotions. Where do emotions come from? Emotions are not material things. So and we know things like hope. Hope. Where does hope come from? And we talked about, what is love? What is it? It's not substantive. Hate also, where did that come from? It's not substantive. Where do we get our morals, our moral values from? And remember, I said that, that you can't call yourself a moral person unless you hold to a set of objective moral values. Because which means that your moral values have to come from a source greater than yourself. And that's why you hear people say, hold yourself to a higher standard. Well, what they're really saying is you're to hold yourself to a standard higher than you. Well, what is higher than man? God. That is essentially what it means to hold yourself to a higher standard. Are you to look to a man who's more morally upright than you? Then what happens when that man fails? He now will say, "Oh well, I'm going to look to somebody." I look to somebody, but eventually you run out of people to look up to. So ultimately, in order for you to call yourself a moral being, there has to be a being that has moral superiority over you, and it's this being that would have laid out all of the laws by which mankind can live, and that being is God. So we discussed that in an earlier study. So let's go on to say that, go on now by giving a couple of definitions of evolution. Evolution has been defined as a gradual, orderly, and continuous process of change and development from one condition or state to another. It encompasses all aspects of life, including physical, psychological, sociological, cultural, and intellectual development, and involves a progressive advancement from a simple to a more complex form or state through the processes of modification differentiation, and growth. That's a bit of a complicated definition, but essentially it talks about evolution has happened over a long process of time, and it's basically talking about the more simple organisms or life, over time changing the simple to the more complex, until eventually, over billions and billions of years, as they always claim that things take billions, this took billions and billions of years, we got to mankind, who's now the supreme being on the planet. The problem with the question that I would ask an evolutionist is where did the extra information and materials come from to go from a one-cell amoeba, a single-cell organism, which is called an amoeba? How did amoeba acquire the extra information and the extra materials and the extra energy needed for it to evolve into a more complex organism? Evolution cannot explain that. But that is a very, very valid question. Because if you're going to go from simple to complex, then that means the simple has to learn how to become complex. A 5-year-old isn't going to go from a 5-year-old or even a 5-year-old just starting preschool isn't going to go from a 5-year-old in preschool to becoming a professor in Harvard, unless that 5-year-old is given additional information and is given time to absorb and understand that information. Now they'll say, oh yes, they've added time to the amoeba. Say, oh, the amoeba's been given billions of years, hundreds of millions of years, however much. But that's fine. But that child will also need energy. You have to feed that child and train up that child and the brain and all that. So energy, effort, outside, an outside influence greater than that child has to work on that child in order to produce that Harvard professor. So what was the outside forces that were working on that amoeba that enabled it to evolve into a more complex organism or their organism? Again, that child, you're going to give that child information, training, in order for it to go from being a 5-year-old child that knows little or nothing to a Harvard professor. So again, who gave that amoeba the extra information it needed? And then energy, food. You feed the child. That child, feed the child, and then the child needs to exercise. The child's going to need medical care. The child's going to need sleep, rest. All kinds of things have to go in. Who provided all of those things for an amoeba for the amoeba to change from that complex thing to a more from a simple one-cell organism into a more complex life form? So all of these questions need to be answered, and evolution does not answer any one of them. So evolution raises more questions than it answers. Another definition given for the theory of evolution is a developmental process in which an organ or organism becomes more and more complex by differentiation of its parts, a continuous and progressive change according to certain laws and by means of resident forces. My question then becomes with regards to this definition of evolution is, what are the certain laws that govern evolution? Who wrote those laws? Did evolution write its own laws? That's like a human creating himself and saying, I created myself based on the laws that I've created. It's circular reasoning, and it makes no sense. Because what came first, the laws or the evolutionary process? Who wrote those laws? Again, that question needs to be answered. And then it says by means of resident forces, which means forces that were in that this happened to be in existence at the time the evolution took place. Well, where did these resident forces come from? That question also needs to be answered. You can't just, so it's saying that without these certain laws and without these resident forces, the process of evolution could not have happened. And then it says developmental processes. Well, if you have developmental processes, you need a developer. Who's the developer that put together these developmental processes? Where's the energy that was needed to keep this continuous and progressive these continuous and progressive changes? Where did the energy come from that was needed for that? Again, the evolution raises more questions than it answers. Now, here's the thing: the real reason why most atheists and humanists deny the existence of God is for moral reasons. They simply do not want to be accountable to somebody outside or greater than themselves. That is really the main reason why most atheists, if they really want to be honest. Now, some atheists may say, I don't believe in God because, they had some kind of traumatic experience. When they were younger, a mother died, a father died, a brother, sister, died, and it traumatized them as a child. Maybe they prayed for their mother to get well, or something happened, and they blamed God. As a child, they blamed God, and this shattered their childhood faith in God. And therefore, as a result of that anger built up until eventually they rejected the whole notion of God, and said, I just refuse to believe in God anymore, and they walked away. But there are many who have chosen not to believe in God because it's more convenient for them not to believe in God. This is because they want the freedom to do whatever they want to do, to say whatever they want to say, and to have that, to be liberated, to be their own being, their own God, so to speak, to make their own decisions. And this echoes back to Epicurus, the doctrine, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And atheists essentially, live out that same life, basically called nihilism, meaning to say that there's no purpose in life, that we're not, there is no divine purpose for why we're alive. We're not living to serve to serve a God. There is we're not. We don't have to go out and there is no divine meaning to our lives. We're the ones that have to pursue our own meaning. We have to pursue our own purpose in life. We're not looking up to the heavens and saying, okay, God, you created me, you placed me here on earth. Now I'm looking to you to tell me why I'm here, why I exist. No, they believe, hey, everybody has to make his own way in life. Every man has to live his own, has to find his own path, and to add purpose and meaning to his life through the things that he does, and through the normal course of living. Now, David addressed such a thing in Psalm 14:1 when he said, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." He said that they are corrupt. they have done abominable works. There is none that who does good. Now, in the original text, it says, the fool is said in his heart, no God. The word, there is no God is kind of in italics, but the original translation should be, the fool has said in his heart, no God, meaning say, I don't want you. I don't want you in my life. Just leave us alone. Leave me alone. And then as a result of that, they have become corrupt, and that corruption led them to do all of the abominable works that they did. If you go back to Genesis, Genesis, chapters 5 and 6, you see that man essentially did the same thing. He rejected God. He said, "No, God, leave me alone. I want nothing to do with you. I want to live my life the way in which I want to live it." And we saw, if you read Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 5, you see that man's heart became so corrupt that eventually God looked down and said, it grieves me that I have made man on the earth. And then he made the decision to send a flood to destroy all life on earth. And we see that we are moving in that direction today, where man is essentially saying, no God. They're doing everything they can to silence the voice of the church, and pushing the church further and further and further into the shadows, out of the public square, out of society, because man just does not want to be told what to do. We see from Paul's letter to the church in Rome that the Romans essentially also did the same thing. They became so corrupt, eat and drink and be merry, and all of this ultimately led to the destruction of the Roman Empire. Paul describes this in Romans chapter 1 verse 28 when he says, "And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting." So it says that they did not want to retain the knowledge of God in their minds, meaning to say that they knew that God existed. They were fully aware that God existed, but they just said, "No, God, we don't want you in our society. We don't want you having any control over our lives. We want to live our lives the way in which we want to live them." And we saw that later history shows that that's led to the collapse of the Roman Empire. In Daniel, in Daniel, we see that in chapter 5, we see that Belteshazzar, also became a corrupt king after his father Nebuchadnezzar had been humbled by God and ultimately surrendered his life to God after going through a very dramatic humbling process. He chose to go in the complete opposite direction, and he brought out all of the holy vessels that were used that were used for ceremonial things, and began to eat and drink, and they said they were worshipping the god of wood and stone, and this eating and drinking and this defiling all of the holy vessels that the priests used in the service to God. But then we see that the hand from God appeared from nowhere and wrote on the wall, and Daniel then later interpreted and said, your kingdom has come to an end. So we see that ultimately when man rejects God, when man pushes his, basically thumbs his nose at God and says, God, God, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you. It always leads to that society's destruction. Ultimately, the refusal to believe in God led to the destruction of the British Empire. It led essentially to the collapse of communism. It led so it always leads to to destruction. Slowly, it will erode away. The very things that man has built will collapse, because without God, man cannot have a peaceful existence. There cannot be a peaceful existence in society unless God's moral laws are being observed and enforced. Humanist Henry de Lubeck summed up the core beliefs of humanism when he said, "The turning point in history will be the moment man becomes aware that the only God of man is man himself." Again, this is the ultimate the ultimate belief of atheism. So when atheists say, I don't believe in God, it's false, because they do believe in God. The only God that they believe in is themselves. They've essentially said, I am the God of my own life, and man is the God of this planet. And this way of thinking obviously is not new. That in Isaiah chapter 14 verses 12 to 15, we are told that we're told of the fall of Lucifer. Lucifer also became so full of himself, that he decided to mount a coup essentially against God. He was able to persuade a third of the angels of heaven to join him in his rebellion against God, and he sought to dethrone God and set up his own self on the throne of God to rule over heaven. And we are told by Isaiah, as said in chapter 14 verses 12 and 15, it says, "How are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How are you cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest parts of the pits." The Apostle Paul warns us that a man whom the Bible calls the Antichrist will rise up in the last days, and he will demand that people worship him as God. In 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 3 to 4, he says, "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that all that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." So this is not new. Satan was the first person essentially to really challenge God's authority and say that no, God, essentially, I don't want to be under your rule. I don't want to be under your moral laws. I don't want to be under your dominion. I want to be my own God. I want to have my own. I want to rule my own life. But Satan took it too far in that he literally tried to dethrone God and drive him out of heaven. Obviously, we know that did not work out well for him at all. But since then, Satan has sought to become the god of this world, and he has succeeded in doing that. And how did he succeed in doing that? in that by convincing man that he could be God, that why do you need an external God? You don't need him. You can be your own God. You can rule over this planet, and you can make your own decisions. You can make your own laws. You can make your own rules. Again, this was the whole basis of the lie that Satan told Eve in the Garden of Eden, that if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that your eyes will be opened, and that you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, here's the problem. Adam and Eve's eyes were already opened. They experienced the presence of God. It says that that God would walk with them in the cool of the evening. So they had regular communion with God. If they needed to know anything, God was there. God was there. To tell them anything and everything that they needed to know about the world that He had created for them, the garden, the animals. After all, remember, it was Adam that named all of the animals. Adam was already a god, so to speak. God had given him dominion over all of his creation. All Adam had to do was to acknowledge the God who gave him that dominion. But Adam was already a god. So when Satan said, "You'll be like God," Adam was already like God. He was the God of this planet, under the authority of the God who created him, but he was essentially the God of this planet already. So Satan's deception really was a deception that Adam really really was foolish for falling for, because everything that Satan said that he would give to Adam, God had already given it to him. The other reason why humanists and atheists refuse to believe in God's existence is because they don't want to believe that He exists. They just, it's like they're wishing Him out of existence, because no atheist can really say definitively that God does not exist. I remember we discussed this earlier, that in order for you to be able to scientifically and definitively say that God does not exist, you would essentially need to be God. You'd have to be omnipresent, be able to be everywhere at the same time, so you can look in everywhere at the same time to know for sure that God does not exist. You could not say, well, I'm going to look here first and I'm going to look here. No, you'd have to be able to look at the whole entire universe, every star, every star, every ocean, every behind every tree, everywhere, every molecule, every cell, everywhere. You'd have to be able to see it all in one snapshot of time. Then you'd have to be able to process all of that information. So you'd have to be, omniscient. You'd have to have an infinitely, powerful brain and intellect to be able to process all of that information all together at once. And if you're able to be everywhere at the same time all at once, and you're able to process all of that information all at once, then you'd also have to, by necessity, be an all-powerful. So in order to prove that God does not exist, you would essentially have to be God to prove that God does not exist. So therefore, the argument that the atheists will say, "Oh, I haven't received sufficient evidence to support your claim as a Christian that God exists," is false. It's false. Because you should turn around and say, on what basis are you stating your belief? What is your strong scientific evidence that you can offer me right here, right now, that would definitively prove that God does not exist? And no atheist can do that. because such evidence does not exist. All the evidence, all the scientific evidence and historical evidence, geographic evidence, and anthropological evidence, biological evidence, etc., chemical evidence, all point to creation, and therefore a creator. That is what science truly says. So the problem with that belief is as I said, they believe that they believe that they're the God of this of the supreme being, as Henry D. Lubick said, that they're the supreme being. But the problem is they lost their godhood, so to speak, small g godhood of this planet, of this world. They lost it when Adam sinned and ate of the tree. He essentially surrendered to the will of Satan, and no longer and rebelled against the will of God. Therefore, at that very moment, Satan became man's god. Satan became the god of this world, and has remained the god of this world up until this very day. So therefore, therefore, man saying that they're the supreme being and they're the god of this world and they have control is false, because they gave up that control. Adam lost his dominion, and you have many religions now outside of atheism, secularism, humanism. This is what drives religion. Another deception of Satan is if you work hard enough, if you observe all of these laws and all of these rules and all of these principles, then you'll be accepted by God, and you'll be able to enter into paradise. That you'll be able to recover from your fallen state, and you'll be able to and God will reinstate you as children of God, and you will enter into God's kingdom. Well, that in itself also is a deception. Man cannot work to earn his way back into the Garden of Eden, and that is what religion is all about. It's about man's efforts, to reach up to God and appeal to God, to say, God, look, I'm worthy enough now for you to enter into your kingdom. I have obeyed all of these laws. I have done all of these good works. So therefore, God, you need to accept me. Well, then that's the offering of Cain. Cain offered the fruits of his labor to God, in the belief that God would accept the fruit of his labor, but it was rejected. Abel offered a lamb on the altar, because Abel knew that there was nothing that he could do. There's no amount of good works that he could do that could possibly please God. That his good works could nowhere near, compare to God's holiness, to God's righteousness, to God's majesty, and that he knew that he deserved to die. He knew that the only way to God is to say, God, I deserve to die. I'm not even worthy to come into your presence. In fact, by all accounts, I should be judged. I should be put to death for what I've done. But God, please accept this lamb in exchange for my life, and please have mercy on me and hear and honor my request. And that is why Jesus Christ ultimately came. He came to undo the works of the devil by dying on the cross and being risen from the dead. And now it's through faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ that we now have regained the sonship. We have now regained the dominion that Adam gave up when he ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're not going to be able to get it through good works. But Satan says, oh, it's through knowledge. It talks about knowledge and Gnostics. So this is basically Gnosticism, saying that it's through knowledge that that we're going to acquire heaven, that we will keep evolving, because now we don't evolve physically, we're evolving spiritually, at least that. So Gnosticism is not exactly atheism. So a Gnostic will say, I believe in God, I believe in the spirit realm, but I believe that I'm going to leave this physical body behind, and I'm going to evolve and become a spirit being. And then as a spirit being, I will live for all eternity. So they don't necessarily believe in the God of creation, but they believe that they are spirit beings, and that they're a spirit being that's trapped inside this physical body, and that through knowledge and meditation and stuff, that eventually they will evolve to the point where they will shed their physical body and be freed, and their eternal spiritual bodies will be set free. So again, another deception of the devil, that ultimately meaning that you are in charge of your own destiny. You don't need a God, you don't need a savior in order for you to live forever. So that's essentially Gnosticism. Is through knowledge, and that's what Satan said, that your eyes will be open and you will have knowledge and you'll be like God. And so that's the Gnostic path, that through enlightenment that we'll become like God, not only become like God, that we will become gods ourselves. And therefore, man again, this chooses to reject the notion that God exists, or rejects the notion that they need to submit themselves to God's rule, or that they need a savior in order to live for eternity. The Apostle Paul sums up all of these beliefs, and in his letter to the Romans. We go back to Romans chapter 1, and this time we read verses 28 all the way through to 32, and he says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They are whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful, who, knowing the righteous judgment of God, that those who practice such things are deserving of death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. So he's saying here that they had a full knowledge of who God was. They had a full knowledge of God's righteous laws, but they chose to reject all of them. So he's not saying that they sinned and rebelled against God out of ignorance, but he's saying that they sinned and rebelled against God in the fully understanding and comprehending what they were doing and why they were doing it. And we're even celebrating those who rebelled against God. So therefore, there is no excuse. And look where we are today. That all of those things that Paul described, a whole list of things, violent. Well, look at our cities. Look at the violence that has taken over many of the cities across the country now. Disobedient to parents. How many teenagers that just completely rebel against all authority, starting with their parents. In direct violation of the law that says, honor your father, honor your mother in the Lord, that it may go well with you and that you may have a long life. The unmerciful. You're unmerciful. Not having compassion on the elderly. I mean, you look at the TV and you see videos of people attacking elderly people on the street. I mean, some of these videos are difficult to watch. The atrocious acts that we are seeing happening in cities across the country today. Inventors of evil things. Coming up with new ways. To commit sins. Undiscerning, and that's a big one. Undiscerning, in that they're not understanding what the consequences of their sin is going to bring. They truly have deceived themselves, and self-deception is the worst possible kind of deception, and Satan himself is the chief of that, and that he has self-deceived himself into thinking that he can win this battle against God. And he has convinced his followers that they can win this battle against God too. But we know as Christians that, and Jesus kept warning us, saying that he is going to return. We know that Christ is going to return, and when he does return, Revelation, chapter 19, we see that that he will return on a white horse, carrying a sword, with the host of heaven following him, and he will put an end to this rebellion that continues to build against him. So, where we are now is essentially where where the people were back in Genesis chapter 5. It hasn't gotten as bad as that yet, but we're racing in that direction. Certainly where Rome is, right? Rome was, eat, drink, and be merry, and this and anything goes society. Homosexuality, and was rampant. And look at our society now. Not just homosexuality being rampant, but we have transgenderism. We have this whole movement now saying that you can choose your own sex. You have all kinds of different genders, and then you have the government and corporations celebrating this, saying that there is no that you don't have to be a man or woman. You can be half man or half woman, or you can just be whatever you want to be. Apparently, there are like 30-something different genders now. I mean, all of this again is undiscerning. Man is just refusing, to sit down and reason, and say, does this make sense? Does this make sense? You got politicians willing to pander to any and every sinful tendency, sinful belief or philosophy, celebrating homosexuality, celebrating the destruction of marriage. Now, now married, look at any TV show. There's not a single TV show, almost none, unless you're watching shows that were made 30 or 40 years ago that celebrates the institution of marriage, where you see children truly honoring their mothers and their fathers, where you see a father truly being the moral leader of his home. All such traditional shows that that used that, that the Partridge Family, I Love Lucy, the Cosby Show probably was the last real family friendly show sitcom that was ever made. And now it's like, and all of these sitcoms now, all of them have some kind of sexual component to them. There has to be a token gay person in the show. Now you have shows with bisexual or bisexual, transgender, people, because now the Oscars are now saying that, that in order to qualify for an Oscar, there has to be a certain racial standards now that you have to meet, because now all white people are racist. So if you're a white person, whether you like it or not, you're a racist. I mean, there's all kinds of destructive beliefs. Social justice, meaning you're entitled to to a living wage. You're entitled to housing. You're entitled to a living wage. You're entitled to healthcare. You're entitled to this, that, and the other. So the state again essentially has become the god of the society, and the state is doing everything it can to bankrupt small businesses and anybody that will have the resources to resist the state. This is exactly what happened in all socialist, communist, and fascist countries. The government wipes out the middle class, primarily, and also especially the church. And then the government becomes the god of society. All the people now look to this, are forced to look to the state and worship the state. That is where this country is heading, unless we as the body of Christ, pray, really pray, fast, and intervene and plead with God, to have mercy on us and turn this ship around, turn this country around, because right now this country is heading for a cliff, and that cliff is not that far away. It's a lot closer than we think it is. I'll just end by with a couple of quotes by famous new humanists. First being Nobel Prize winner George Wald, who said, "I will not accept creation philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically possible, spontaneous generation arising from evolution." And George Wald was a Nobel Prize winning biochemical scientist, and he wrote a paper, An Inquiry into Life. And he says, "I do not want to believe. I will not accept it." But he's talking about that I choose to believe in that which I know, which is scientifically possible. Okay, so then here's my question to George, my rebuttal to George Wald. How did we scientifically? How did how did this world and universe come into existence? Now you say the Big Bang theory, that that a small infinitesimal dot exploded and then basically expanded, and then out of that all kinds of gases and matter and everything came out of it, and then eventually these gases formed galaxies and then stars, and then then around one of these stars there was mass material, and that formed the planets, and then on one of those planets just happened to be in the perfect distance from the star which we call the sun, and then over billions of years there was the first living cell organism evolved, and then everything goes from there. Then that evolved over time, the simple, as I said, to simple into the more complex, based on resident forces and certain laws that that were in place, which I've asked, where did the resident forces come from? Where did who wrote the laws that governed this process? My question would be, where did the dot come from? The dot that you say exploded, where did it come from? Who placed that dot there? When was that dot placed there? How did it explode? Evolution has yet to answer those 4 basic questions that any 5-year-old child would ask. A 5-year-old would say, well, the dot exploded. How did you squish all of the universe and everything that it contains? How did you squish that all into a little tiny dot? Can you explain that to me? A 5-year-old would ask that question. And I would ask too. Answer that question, Mr. Walls. When you say you're only going to believe in something that is scientifically, you said, which is scientifically impossible. Sorry, I apologize. He said, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible, which makes it even worse. So he's basically saying, I choose to believe a lie. I choose to believe that which I know could never happen scientifically. So that's the whole crux of the matter, that he's saying, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible. And therefore that is true self-deception. You're choosing to believe a lie. You're choosing as a scientist to believe in something that you know is not true. And that's why I say most atheists, don't believe in God, not because they can prove that God doesn't exist, because they know that they can't prove it scientifically. It is a conscious choice that they have made not to believe. I possibly gave him credit and said, I choose to believe in what is scientifically possible. No, he's choosing to believe in what is scientifically impossible, which means he's choosing to believe a lie. Evolution is a lie. It is not true. So this one quote should be enough, to discredit the theory of evolution completely. And he's a Nobel Prize winner. He's not some random professor that they could just brush aside and say, "Oh, that was just his opinion." And look at all these other well-respected scientists that do believe it and have evidence and have no. He was a Nobel Prize winner, so he's not just some middle of the road university or college professor or so saying this. And lastly, I'll end with Jeremy Rifkin, fellow humanist Jeremy Rifkin, who took what George Wald said, but he took it one step further. And he said, we no longer feel ourselves to be guests in someone else's home, and therefore obliged to make our behavior conform with a set of pre-existing cosmic rules. It is our creation now. We make the rules. We establish the parameters of reality. We create the world. And because we do, we no longer feel beholden to outside forces. We no longer have to justify our behavior, for we are now the architects of the universe. We are responsible to nothing outside ourselves. So we are the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever and ever. And this, no words to describe this, the audacity that this guy had to say what he said. He's now taking the scriptures. We are that that they are the power and the glory forever. You may as well just added the word amen at the end of it to make it a true Bible passage. You'd think this was taken from scripture, but it is. It's taken from their humanist philosophy. We're not. It is our creation. So he's claiming we own this planet. But he's not. He's not saying that they made it, but we own it. Well, we make the rules. Well, yes, they make the rules. That they've chosen to make their own rules to say this is how we want to live. We've established the parameters of reality, and that's why evolution is being pushed in our schools. Then you have people like Bill Nye, who's not a scientist, by the way. I think he studied engineering. He's not a scientist, saying that it's child abuse to teach creation in school. That you're basically brainwashing your children by teaching them a falsehood, that it's a fairy tale. Of course, Richard Dawkins has nothing but contempt, for the notion that that God exists and that we are created by a benevolent, all-knowing, all-powerful, and ever-present God. He said we establish the parameters. He said, we create the world. Well, how? How do you create the world? With what materials? What power? What power? It's just, again, this making ridiculous, claims. We no longer feel beholden to outside forces. Meaning, we don't want God, to interfere with how we live our lives. This is where man will devolve to when they shut God out of their lives. And I'll just end here by saying that we are headed towards destruction. We don't know when Christ is going to return, but we know we know that God is not going to stay his hand too much longer before he responds to all of the bloodshed, all of the violence, all of the sin that is rampaging through our nation. So I just want to end by just asking everybody to pray for our nation and pray that our hearts will indeed, turn back to God. Well, that's all I have for you today. In this lesson, I truly hope that you enjoyed it. I truly hope that you found it inspiring and informative. If so, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click that notification bell so you'll be notified the next time I post a study. And our final study in this series is entitled The Products of Evolution. And we're going to really look at the theory of evolution, and we're going to really go through it in detail. And you'll be pretty shocked when you understand, how destructive this philosophy has been ever since it was introduced, well over 150 years ago. So thank you again, for joining me, and I really look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.